Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today, I want to talk about a book that I read, one that I checked out at random from my local library. Don't forget to patronize your local libraries. They might have interesting reads. And today's book is all about racism and recreational tennis clubs that are very selective in their membership. I am referring to Members Only by Samir Pandya, which was published in 2020. And as you can see by the cover, there is a dirty tennis ball in an otherwise very clean body of water. I wonder if that is symbolic or anything. Let's find out. For those who don't know, Samir Pandya is an Indian American author who's been getting work published for about 10 years now. He teaches at the University of California at Santa Barbara, so we are both employees of the UC system, which is always interesting. He's gotten essays published about immigrants and racism and stuff like that. He's published short stories as well as like 2 books, which includes a collection of short stories, and this book, which is the most recent thing that he published, which is a very interesting book that is worth talking about. Not a whole lot of other information available about him out there, but he does seem to be an interesting author, at least as it pertains to his writing style and the ideas that he is working with. So as I talk about this, I am going to, I'm not going to spoil it in the summary section, but I might spoil a few things in the analysis section in terms of what happens to the main character. So, if you want to read this, if you're curious about the book, which I might recommend, I'm very much on the fence about this book. If you're going to read it, I definitely recommend you go out there and read it and come back to this video so that we can have a discussion about it afterwards. But other than that, without further ado, let's talk about Members Only. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So Members Only focuses on Raj. He is an Indian American man who teaches anthropology at a local university, and he also belongs to a members only recreational club called the Tennis Club, which certainly isn't very imaginative. And he's also part of the Welcome Committee, and he's particularly excited at the start of the story because the Welcome Committee is interviewing new families who want to join the club, and he's noticed that there's been a lack of diversity. He's the only person of color at the tennis club, and so he's happy that a black family is interviewing, which he is hoping joins and that they can play tennis together and whatnot and become friends or whatever. But in an effort to make a joke and seemingly connect with this black family, ironically named the Browns, who are a family of doctors, he attempts to make a joke, and he says, "Please," which is very weird writing on Pandya's part. But this creates an awkward silence, and at first nothing happens. They continue, but the Brown family leaves unhappy, and Raj goes out to meet them in the parking lot, but they quickly drive away. And the other members of the tennis club are angry with Raj, noting that it was kind of racist for him to do that, definitely racist for him to do that, and they want him to apologize publicly as well to the members who recruited the Brown family, which Raj doesn't want to do, because if he delivers any apology, it's going to be to the Brown family and not to the other tennis club members who feel that they're owed an apology for inviting Raj to the club in the first place, who turned out to be this terrible human being. Over the next couple days, Raj teaches an anthropology class, and during the first day, he touches upon Christianity, noting how the West and Catholicism often co-ops elements of Indian culture and Indian religions because Western culture can be empty at times. And although no one says anything in lecture, this does not go well with the students, who begin to complain to the dean about the subject of his lecture, and this eventually makes its way through a video to right-wing websites who argue that Raj is being a reversed racist in his criticism of Western culture. Also noting that he's un-American as well. And although the students are complaining, the faculty or the department is behind him, because this is just the usual critique in anthropology, and just noting, studies of Orientalism and all of that, he really didn't do anything wrong there. But still the students are very upset, and some of them even confront him with a hunger strike. And he notes that he owes them no apology, and he begins thinking about all the racism that he's experienced in the present moment, but also in the past, and how this seems to be a buildup of all of that, and is making him more anxious, and it's causing a little strife in his home life as well. And while all of this is happening, the tennis club members are demanding the apology, and he still hasn't really reached out to the Brown family to issue the apology, possibly because his life is very busy up to this point. But again, there are calls for his firing at the school, and the school isn't really wanting to do that, but they're giving him a leave of absence, which shows that they're more in favor of their own image than protecting a faculty member of color. And this only adds to Raj's worries that he's going to lose his job and his family is going to suffer as a result. And then him and one of the students, Robert, get into an argument where Robert notes how he's being very critical of this culture that has been so accepting of him, and how Robert has been very quiet in class and hasn't really spoken out, noting that there's some stuff brewing beneath the surface, which we see near the end of the story kind of develop and build up into sort of an explanation for why we're in this weird cultural moment. And he also meets up with a friend named Emily through this story. Emily is a poet, and they both studied anthropology together, but they took different life paths. And nothing ever comes of this. It seems like he's attracted to her, but nothing ever really develops. So I don't know what Pandya was really doing there, but that develops through the story, and then from there, the rest of the book takes place where Raj confronts the tennis club, and he confronts the student Robert, and some major things happen, which I'll let you get to if you're interested in reading, but I'll discuss in the analysis section, and that's where it ends there. In terms of analysis, this book was kind of a doozy in terms of, getting me, in terms of my opinion of it, because, I'm kind of torn. There's a lot of great things discussed in here, but boy, does Pandya take his time getting to that point, and just introduces a bunch of random things that never really go anywhere in this story. And the kickoff event, I would say, of this story is kind of cringe at times, but I'll discuss all of that as I get there. One of the main themes that Pandya is working with here is that of belonging. Raj is an Indian American man who feels like he doesn't belong in this country, and this is not the first time that he's felt this way. At the start of the story, all this racism and this ethnicism, or this white nationalism that's going on in the country at the time. It's nothing new to Raj, because when he was in America, when he was in college, he experienced racism to a great deal of level, whether it be people making fun of his name, asking him to do impressions of the Indian accent, or inviting him to a party, and then when he's caught making out with a white one of the frat members' girlfriends who made the move on him in the first place, they beat him up, and he gets in trouble with the school. And also another instance is where he is at his previous job, he got into a conflict with his normally peaceable sort of faculty head, the director of the department, and like after that blowout, he got fired, it seemed like he had to leave in some way, and it had something to do with the fact that normally, like, he was a great addition, a great diversity addition, but when he challenged the status quo in any meaningful way, it seemed like he was no longer welcome there. So again, belonging coming up a lot in Raj's past and present, because when he challenges the status quo in the present day, when he says that Christianity and the Western cultures can be somewhat hollow at times, and so they need to borrow from other cultures in order to give people a sense of understanding and meaning, like that does not sit well. And he's not even the first person who said that. Like, that's a facet of anthropology that has existed since the 50s, since for quite a while. But when a brown Indian man says it, oh no, that can't be good. This person is un-American. They're a liberal professor trying to brainwash our students, brainwash our children. And there's also that anti-American school protest where they put up a bunch of posters of the Hajj kind of person, that emoji, which I'll put somewhere up around here. Not even getting, Raj's ethnicity right there, not even getting his identity right with that poster, but basically creating a stereotype of him for them to mock and call him out on. There's a sense of othering going on here, and that's really the basis of the entire story, even going down to the title, where the title is called Members Only. It's based on a sign that shows up, a sign that's at the tennis club, which Raj doesn't like. One, because, it makes the club seem a little too exclusionary, kind of making it elitist, but also the fact that it really brings to light the segregation that exists in the club, that no people of color are really allowed to belong to the club because they have to be invited by somebody. And as Raj says at the end of the story, like, the only people you're inviting to the club are people that you're friends with, that you've had a chance to vet and screen and identify as the good minorities. And that makes the club no better, because at that point you're not really hiding the fact that it's racist. You're not really hiding the fact that there's segregation. You're just trying to clean up the club and make it seem like it's more diverse than it actually is by inviting those people that you've screened. And the racism and the sense of not really belonging here is always going to exist. Allow me to read you an interesting quote from this. "This is exactly the time and place for them. We did not sacrifice quality in getting them here. What the hell does that mean? Let me tell you. You're saying that you usually have to sacrifice quality when you hire black people. It's easy for you to turn to me and insist I apologize so that you can go back to the Browns and say, see, there's no race problem here. We handled the race problem. You haven't. The problems here are much deeper than me and my stupid mouth and my one terribly offensive joke. This place is essentially segregated. It has existed for decades, and if we went through all the records, we probably could count on one hand how many non-white members it has had." And that's a very interesting sort of passage from this book, where Raj is calling them out on it. Like, even if you invite these members of colors, there's so few of them here. It's just Raj and presumably the Brown family. Like, they're never going to feel like they belong here. You're not fixing the race problem, because the club was segregated to begin with, and you never fixed the institutional problems that were underlying there. And so Raj does a really good job, and Pandya does a really good job of highlighting the inequalities that exist in this club setting, but by zooming out moving outwards and focusing on like the college and the institution and how they don't back up Raj and encourage him to leave so that the controversy can die down for a little bit. Like, it shows that the larger system hasn't really solved these inequality problems, these racism and segregation problems that have existed. And the feeling never really goes away for Raj. At the end of the story, the problem isn't solved, which I do like on Pandya's part. Like, he doesn't fix the problem and say, hey, everything looks better once we identify that the problem is racism. He's kind of indicating that it's always going to be there. Like Raj notes that as long as he has people that he can stand beside and family and people who are willing to support him, maybe you can address that problem and dismantle the racist institutions in the future. This kind of reminded me a lot of Invisible Man in that regard. Although Invisible Man is definitely more pessimistic and more focused on the fact that this character doesn't exist. For Raj in the story, like for him, the problem is that he exists too much. He's too visible, and his race is always being used either to benefit other people, to make it seem like, there's no problem with diversity or racism, or like it's being used to make him seem un-American. And I like those comparisons, but also, given that I've already read Invisible Man and given that Invisible Man already exists, does this need to be said again in this way? I think that's a good question to ask, because if it just duplicates that kind of message, sure, it's Invisible Man, but for Indian Americans. And is that different enough to justify its existence? I don't know. Another interesting idea that Pandya talks about here is directed racial violence. Racial violence doesn't have to be a grand sort of lynching type thing. It can be something as small as targeted harassment. And what's interesting is that Pandya draws a comparison here in the story between racial violence in Ahmedabad, and racial violence in this community that Raj lives in. Because he notes how in 2002 thereabouts, there was violence between Muslims and Hindus in response to the death of some Hindus in Ahmedabad. And in the story, Raj interviews a government worker, but he also interviews his cabbie, and the cabbie seems to parrot a lot of the things that the government worker is saying about the Muslims, and that they seem to have started the problem. Raj notes that this government worker was clearly influencing the cabbie and telling him that, the Muslims are the source of your problems. If you get rid of them, then your life might be elevated in some way from the position it is right now. And he also goes on to talk about the character of Robert, a college student who things don't seem to be going very well for. He seems lonely. He seems a bit of an incel. He seems like he was promised many things, and very few of those things were delivered to him. As the story progresses, we see that he filmed Raj initially talking about Christianity in his lecture, and then sent it to right-wing websites and sent it to other students in order to get in good with them and draw awareness of this anti-American man that was causing problems at this college. And we see later on that Raj is actually upset. He tells Raj, I see you have this life with this wonderful wife, these beautiful children, and you belong to this great club. Why can't I have that? And at first I was wondering, where is Pandya going with the Robert character? Why is he demanding respect in this way from this Indian man that he doesn't know? But it became more apparent as I drew the connections between Ahmedabad and Robert. Pandya is noting that just as the Hindu government workers were influencing the lowly bottom of society people to do violence, so are these right-wing people of power doing so to people like Robert, who have nothing in life, and so they're being channeled to do violence against minorities in the hopes that it'll make them it'll raise their position in life. I can think of examples like the 2021 insurrection that took place in Washington D.C. I can also think of that Illinois kid who shot the people during the protest in 2020. I forget his name, but I'll put it up here somewhere. But he was more of a lower class person who was told that violence was happening in the streets and that it was his job to basically take care of it. And in fact, he did. And I find it really fascinating that this was written in 2020, probably before all of that took place, maybe before the George Floyd protest. But here he is observing something that happened in 2002 and saying, hey, our country is kind of heading towards that way. Our country is such where there are people being influenced to do violence in order to send a message to immigrants, to people of color, to make sure that they don't ask for more than they're already given in America. It's a very powerful kind of message to put out there. It's very interesting because it's observing something that's different from maybe Invisible Man. that when you do try to fight for more, when you try to make yourself undeniable, there's going to be people there to smack you down, but they might not do it themselves. They might use other people, like Robert in this case, to send that message, and because they're easily, manipulatable, because they're not being given what they need in life, because again, those people in power are denying it as a tool to oppress you further. There's also a couple other interesting ideas in this story, such as the idea of overt and covert racism and what people are, like what white individuals are willing to accept. Specifically, there's a lot of covert racism that takes place, with people calling Raj Kumar and various different names, like stuff under the surface that is accepted in this society. But the moment that overt racism happens, people are like, oh no, we don't accept this. This is wrong. Go away. And like a good example of this is when Raj says please, like that to the high society club, like there's only so much racism you can do. Like you can't say it too loud, like you're saying the quiet part loud. It has to be underneath the surface. That's the minimal amount of racism that we'll accept, or else things have been taken too far. So for a lot of people in society, for a lot of people at this club, like the problem isn't racism, it's overt racism. Where like it seems obvious, and so you don't want to make it obvious, at least according to these people. There's a number of other interesting ideas, as I mentioned. Again, the idea of internalized racism, how maybe Raj is doing this because he's just reiterating the racism that was done to him, and that might feel normalized in some sort of way. And then also highlighting the medical effects of racism, as Raj has a heart attack in his story, and noting that it comes from the stress and the anxiety of being in this system that constantly tells you that you're not worthy and tries to take away anything that you have, depending on the color of your skin. But of course, there are some other things that are not so great about this story. The slow beginning, I was very well considering just stopping reading 50 pages in. It's like, this seems weird, and I'm not sure it's going in any good direction. And even 100 pages in, I wouldn't say it was that much of improvement. It goes very slow and kind of meanders. But I do think that Pandya does set it on the right path, and definitely overcomes those obstacles that were created in the first 50 to 100 pages, specifically nailing the ending. And I do think, like, any book can have a weak ending and still be pretty memorable. But if a book has a bad ending, that's curtains for it, and there's no hope for it. So Pandya clearly understands the value of a solid and really solid last third of the story. And then the other problem is the whole idea of please, which I think is a weird joke to tell. It's not even a joke, it's just a phrase. Like, Raj says he wanted to make a joke to the Brown family, and it just seems like a weird statement to make that doesn't really belong in the story. Like, it could have been so many other jokes that he would have made that would have made sense in the context of what he was doing here, that wasn't nearly as bizarrely offensive. And what's worse is it comes off as kind of comedic, like saying that phrase at that moment, it nearly sunk the story for me. I was like, I don't know if this author is wasting my time or not. if they're actually trying to tell a coherent story, or they're just making a weird joke about everything. I think it's just a weak moment in an otherwise very powerful sort of book about racism, but still, like that kind of example, that kind of instance, using that phrase, it could have very, very easily derailed the book and never got it back on the right path again. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Members Only by Samir Pandya. A really solid book. I think the another complaint that I had mentioned was that once the Brown family leaves, and at the beginning of the story, they're not really seen again until the end, which I think hurts the story somewhat. Like, I like how Raj meets the Brown family again, but I do think that throwing them out of the story entirely kind of makes the story suffer in some way. Like they should have been a more of a factor and less of a footnote in this story about racism. But besides all of that, it's still a pretty fascinating and interesting story that I think is worth reading, and I think I'm going to recommend it to you out there. Like, if you don't want to buy it, at least find it at your local library. It's an interesting read, especially given that it might have come out before the pandemic really hit, or Pandya might have written it before the pandemic hit. So it's a fascinating prediction of a world to come, or a world that we're currently living in a couple years later after this was written. So I'm really fascinated by that. And I do encourage you to broaden your horizons and read more stories like this out there. But if you read it before, you simply want to comment on something I said here, do so below. Let's have a discussion about members only. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about the story, this author, or just this channel if they don't know about it already. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and anti-racist travels. Farewell.